So, dear all, good day. I'm glad to welcome you on the cycle of webinars, Introduction to Logotherapy. And my name is Nino Berznishvili. I'm the president of Caucasus Association of Logotherapy and Existential Analysis. We are the part of International Association and the first organization that officially presents logotherapy in Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine. Our association is dedicated to promote Viktor Frankl's Third Viennese School of Psychotherapy. We provide accredited professional course of logotherapy, supporting development and build a multicultural community. For more information and enrollment, you can visit our Facebook page and other social media pages or send us the email. Today, we have an amazing opportunity to join 5 lectures about the basis of logotherapy by Rabbi Dr. Shimon Cohen, director of the Institute for Judaism and Civilization in Melbourne, Australia, academic and researcher, the professor of Monash University, one of the leading universities in Australia. The lecture will be in English, so you can write your questions in chat, and after the lecture, Dr. Cohen will take some time to answer on them. Let's be kind and polite to each other, and you are welcome to share your insights and ask questions after the lecture. Also, in case of necessity, we will have a brief summary of the lecture in Russian before the QA part for those who will face any difficulties with English to prevent any misunderstanding. This part will be presented by Mrs. Ina Zaitseva, the director of the Academy of the Universal Ethics in Australia, author of numerous publications on cross-cultural issues and integration, Dr. Cohen's friend and mentee. Our sincere gratitude to both of them, and let's begin. I will pass the word to Dr. Cohen.
Thank you very much. Well, I have a certain amount of material to discuss, but I can certainly elaborate it in the light of questions. So maybe I will say this, give this talk in some sections so that people may have an opportunity to ask questions or comment as we go along. Now, we're living in a time where there is a good deal of challenge and in many places great crisis. And this crisis could be personal crisis, it can be collective crisis, it can be conditions of war, it can be conditions of collective, of societal conditions in which there is depression for various reasons. And so logotherapy is a teaching which applies not just to the individual, but has a very important lesson for the times, for the society, and for the times which we live, and for society as a whole. Logotherapy was born and tested in conditions of deep crisis and trauma. So logotherapy, as we know, is the name of the school of psychology founded by the great Viennese psychologist Viktor Frankl, who was born in 1905 and died in 1997. The name logotherapy signifies a therapy based on logos, a Greek term which could be translated as meaning. The basic concept of logotherapy is that meaning is central to the psychological well-being and fulfillment of the individual. Meaning refers to the understanding of one's place and purpose in the world. It relates to the values for which one lives. A framework of meaning gives one the ability to respond successfully to the many challenges of life. It allows us to understand crisis as a challenge to which we have to respond with an ethical action or an ethical attitude. In other words, it helps us to respond meaningfully to our situation. When we do this, we help reduce the stress of trauma. And I use the word help because Frankl stated that logotherapy, as I'll develop in a later lecture, is a supplementary therapy. It does not replace other therapies which may be needed in specific circumstances, but it is a vital supplement and a vital accompaniment to other therapies. So therefore, logotherapy can help us to reduce stress or trauma which a particular crisis has caused, and we're helped to emerge from it with a stronger psychological equilibrium. It's this quality of logotherapy which makes it highly relevant to many situations, to situations of war, to situations of collective depression or anxiety, which are found in certain societies around the world today. We know that the challenge may be a global one. There are places that we mentioned of war, and there are challenges also posed by peace. Sometimes, I might just add parenthetically, we don't know sometimes which are the harder challenges, whether a challenge of extreme stress, warfare, and so forth is harder than some conditions in contemporary society where there has been a total erosion of values altogether, and people find themselves in something of a free fall, so to speak, in values. People lose their orientation. So peace provides its challenges. War presents its challenges. And the individuals can be in a whole variety of circumstances where they need which have become for them critical. So, whilst Frankl's theory was crystallized, so to speak, in situations of extreme stress, namely that of the Holocaust, he was an inmate of several concentration camps. We have to be able to relate. We are able to relate logotherapy to, if you like, much lesser stresses. I myself can have some inkling, some idea of what the stress of the Holocaust was, because as a Jewish person, I'm very much aware of the horrific suffering which was experienced by the Jewish people, and my own parents-in-law were Holocaust survivors. So I basically mention the Holocaust as I suppose as the benchmark of crisis, the worst kind of crisis, the deepest kind of crisis, and it was this crisis which actually saw the birth of logotherapy. Frankl's work came into its own as a result of the test of this ultimate crisis, the crisis of being inmate in a concentration camp. And he writes about this. He writes about this at length. And in fact, as you all know, his great early work, Man's Search for Meaning, is precisely about about how through logotherapy, he and the others whom he was able to help could come through a crisis of perhaps unparalleled proportions. Now, logotherapy is deeply linked to the concept of self-transcendence. And when we speak about meaning in logotherapy, this does not mean, as I understand it, any meaning. When I say to simply say we have to find meaning for our lives, that may not necessarily be a self-transcending meaning. And I want to elaborate this as we go on. People operate with meanings all the time. It doesn't mean that doesn't, however, signify that the meaning which they find is the product of genuine self-transcendence. And as I wish to develop later in these lectures, the concept of self-transcendence actually came to be associated in Frankl's thought with universal values, with objective values. Now, I realize that there is actually a slight tension in Frankl's work, and a book which I have published, which is called the Rediscovery of the Human, Psychological Writings of Viktor Frankl on the Human and the Image of the Divine. In the introduction to this book, I point out that there is a certain tension in Frankl's own work. There can be a tension between the concept of objective, universal values, which are the, if you like, that which comes about through an ultimate self-transcendence. And on the other hand, there could be even a possibility of a relativism of meanings. I personally connect with that strand in Frankl's work where he says that he is not a relativist, where he says that there are objective, universal values. But I will develop that more as these lectures proceed, please goodness. So back to the concept of self-transcendence. Now, what does this actually mean? As mentioned before, meaning itself is insufficient without the concept of self-transcendence as that which produces that meaning. Because people can always give reasons for their actions. They can give reasons for their feelings. And they can give reasons for the way they view the world. But these may not necessarily be very good reasons. They're the values which they put for the values which they posit, which they say, which they use to justify and explain their feelings, perceptions, and beliefs may not be very meritorious values at all. So we need to understand that the meaning of the meanings about which Frankl speaks, the meanings of logotherapy, are meanings which are produced through an act of genuine self-transcendence. And we have to understand what this actually means. So, if we use a basic model of human personality to which Frankl which Frankl elaborates, then we see that the human personality consists of three dimensions. There is, first of all, the physical or the bodily, or what Frankl also calls the somatic dimension. This has to do primarily with the physical organism of the human being. Its biological, emotional, and instinctual characteristics. The second dimension of the human being is what we could call the mental or psychological dimension. The distinction, but this mind is distinct from body. Now, this level, what does this have to do? This mental dimension has to do with perceptions. The way in which the person thinks, the way in which the person sees, strategizes in the world, grasps things, picks up things, in short, the realm of perception. The third dimension of the human personality has to do with that which is that faculty which produces an overall guiding meaning for the personality as a whole. This third level, which Frankl calls a noetic, which has to do with the concept noos, meaning, purpose. This third dimension unifies and coordinates the physical, emotional, and the mental dimensions of the human being. In other words, this higher faculty is that which has the ability to guide and coordinate and to lead the subordinate faculties of emotion and of body and mind. Frankl, as we just mentioned before, called this third faculty noetic faculty. It is potentially and it is properly the dominant and the sovereign force within the human being. In other words, our faculty of meaning, you could call it a spiritual faculty, a meaning faculty. This is the highest faculty within the human being, and it has the faculty, it has the bodily and mental aspects of personality as its vehicles. It is able to, it structures them, it guides them, it coordinates them. Now, this third faculty of meaning was one which Frankl wanted to be characterized particularly by the phenomenon of self-transcendence. What does self-transcendence actually mean? It means that, for example, I use my spiritual or conscience dimension of personality to rise above or to transcend the other dimensions, or the dimensions of myself, my personality and being. So basically, what does this mean? If I am able to transcend my emotions, what that means is that I am no longer ruled by these emotions. I can distance myself from these emotions, my passions, my reactions. To the contrary, I'm able to, not only am I not ruled by them, I'm able actually to examine them and to judge their validity from the standpoint of conscience. With regard to the mental or psychological dimension, I am then in a state of self-transcendence. I'm not dominated by my perceptions, which may include anxieties, depressions, various confusions. Rather, I distance myself from these perceptions, and I can examine in the light of conscience whether they are justified or not. And in the third dimension, which is the dimension of meaning itself, and this is a very important point, here too self-transcendence is important. In other words, just because we have meaning, we have a meaning faculty, this does not mean that that meaning faculty is operating in a self-transcending way. And what I mean by that is that this meaning faculty could in fact be dominated by ideology, or as Frankl would sometimes put it out, collective pathologies. The pathology of the times, the pathology of what he called the Zeitgeist, the German expression means the spirit of the times. It could be this itself. The meanings which circulate in society, they can also be pathological meanings. And so these value sets, which are the concern of the highest faculties in the human being, these too have to be subjected to the test of self-transcendence. So I have let's explore now a little bit more what the meaning of self-transcendence is. So the power of self-transcendence within the human being is ultimately something which Frankl calls a spiritual power. The secular person could call it conscience. The religious person might call it the soul. In fact, for each, it is essentially the same. It's one and the same. Whatever the person terms it, whether a person is an atheist or an agnostic or a religious person, when a person begins to undertake the course of self-transcendence, they are awakening one and the same quality, the one and the same spirit within themselves. The power of self-transcendence actually exposes the spiritual, that which is truly spiritual within the human being. And how does it emerge? How does it express itself? Well, it expresses itself, generally speaking, if I had to give one single example of how to pinpoint this idea of self-transcendence, it's expressed in the idea of asking oneself, not what do I want, but what does life, or what is wanted of me? In other words, not what do I see, what do I want, how do I feel, but how am I supposed to be? What is life asking of me? What is my purpose? Now, this attitude of self-transcendence, therefore, what does it do? It subordinates all of the, if you like, all of the values which may presently be active in the human being, whether these are emotional or perceptual or even meaningful, even meanings. It subjects all of these values, if you like, to a self-questioning, to a standpoint which says, okay, I feel this, I perceive this, I think this. But the person who undergoes self-transcendence says, okay, this is I, but is this authentic? Is this what is really wanted of me? Well, Frankl would say, the individual in a mode of self-transcendence relativizes his or her own predispositions, emotions, feelings, perceptions to something higher. One is prepared to let go of all of these and to suspend them in the light of this higher questioning. Is this what I am supposed to be feeling? Is this what I am supposed to be perceiving? Is this meaning the meaning is this meaning authentic? And when the human being asks this, when the human being takes up this stance, if you like, of basic humility or self-transcendence, rising above oneself and all of the dimensions of oneself, then one is open to meanings which are the genuine expression of self-transcendence. Now, once one is in this mode, one is able now to look at the meanings. It doesn't mean the self-transcendence does not mean that one will necessarily reject one's feelings or perceptions or values, but rather it will lead one to discern and to discriminate amongst them. It will see which of them can be accepted, which of them can be rejected, which of them need modification, and so forth. But they will all be subjected to a standard which is above them all. So very basically, and maybe people would like to ask questions at this particular point of time, what I believe Frankl is saying. And Frankl used various words. Frankl spoke about this. He was prepared to, and he intentionally wished to be able to address everyone, whether people are believers in a religious sense, whether people are secularists, wherever people stand. Frankl said, we can awaken in each and every person this quality of self-transcendence, But I think Frankl in fact called it the unconscious God within the person, because some people don't want to call it soul. They don't want to say that it's reaching out towards God. But essentially, whatever name the person gives it, the human beings who are engaged in self-transcendence, they are in fact awakening a spiritual faculty within themselves. The religious person calls it the soul. The non-religious person calls it the conscience. And others might call it something else, but it's one and the same thing. It is this ultimate ability to transcend oneself and to submit all of one's feelings, perceptions, and accepted values to a higher scrutiny, if you like, to a higher standpoint altogether. Now, I'm going to say some more, but I don't know if anybody would like to ask any questions at this point. Shall I proceed, or are there comments or questions at this point of time? Okay, I can't. Okay, I don't. All right. So in that case, I'll proceed. Okay. Now, so self-transcendence is what is self-transcendence, of course, is a vital element in Frankl's logotherapy. And the faculty which it opens, namely, we can call it the soul, we can call it conscience, we call it whatever, is extremely important to another set of concepts in Frankl's work. And these are the concepts of freedom and responsibility. So, what are these? What are these qualities? What is the meaning of these terms of freedom and responsibility? Well, freedom signifies the ability of the individual under all circumstances to act or respond in a meaningful way to those circumstances. The human being is never, in other words, determined. The human being is not determined by external circumstances, by internal circumstances. Not just external constraints, but also the person is not determined by physical or mental constraints, because there is always a space in which the individual can freely rise above his or her predicament, situation, and examine and respond. Even if a person is unable physically to move, even if a person has lost the power of movement, has lost the power of speech, that person is still free to take up an attitude, as Frankl famously said, to the situation, and inwardly to respond towards it. In other words, that so long as one is conscious, one can respond to one situation in thought, in attitude. Even if one cannot speak or act, there's always a space for free response to the situation. So this faculty of self-transcendence is the essentially healthy aspect of the human being. It is never sick. It's always whole. So Frankl, in fact, speaks here of what he calls the defiant power of the human spirit. It can always distance itself and separate itself from the passions of the body, the perceptions of the mind, and even from the ideologies which crowd into to the noetic faculty. It is always free to examine these, to challenge these, and to respond to these. So this spiritual self, this capacity for self-transcendence, is the innermost and the essential I, the identity, the innermost essential identity of the human being. It is forever free and forever sovereign, independent. Now, from this freedom which the human being possesses, and comes the power of responsibility. Freedom means I am able to respond. Responsibility means I must respond. I must take up a position to my situation. That is essentially what it means to be human. The human being is able, in other words, and is bound to respond meaningfully to all circumstances. And as we mentioned before, the response may be to act, to do something good, or to rectify a situation. It may have to do with the arousal of an emotion, of a positive emotion, of a worthy emotion or response to the situation, or towards another person. Or it may be, and if not this, it may simply be the ability to take up a meaningful attitude towards one's predicament, towards one's situation. So but it's very interesting. I'll return to this point, but I would like to make it here right now. That what we have here in the concepts of freedom and responsibility, we have something which is incredibly important in today's society. Of course, I live in a Western society, and I'm not wholly acquainted with what is happening culturally in the societies of Central Europe or Eastern Europe. However, I can say that the concept of human freedom has been significantly eclipsed in the West. There is an ideology which sees the human being as largely determined by emotion and perception alone. And Frankl's work comes along and tells us that this is not so. And why is it not so? Because in addition to the emotional and perceptual dimensions of personality, there is a faculty of self-transcendence which reaches out to conscience, which expresses itself as conscience. And the fact that the human being has these two elements within, namely, on the one hand, the psychophysical dimension, body and mind, and on the other hand, the spiritual, means that the human being has a choice. The person has the choice whether to listen to the psychophysical dimension or whether to listen to conscience. That is freedom. Freedom is born from the midst of these two competing dimensions within the human being, the psychophysical on the one hand, and this conscience dimension, spiritual on the other hand. That is how freedom exists. Without it, you don't have freedom. Without it, the human being, as Frankl would have pointed, is simply driven. And we can be driven by emotions, we can be driven by perceptions, and we can be driven by ideologies. It's only a faculty which is able to transcend all of these, which gives us real freedom, the freedom to choose whether to accept an emotion, to accept a perception, to accept an ideology or not. That is where freedom is. And this point sounds very simple, but it is absent from major areas of mainstream psychology today, which see human beings in a reductionist and deterministic manner, that the human being cannot help their perceptions, cannot help their feelings, and so on. So I just return to this point because the concept of freedom is not something which should be taken lightly. It's something of major importance, culturally, spiritually, significantly, and psychologically. All right. So, therefore, we just to return to this concept of responsibility, as you probably all know, responsibility responsibility can simply mean that I have an obligation and I am accountable. But Frankl also used the word responsibility in the sense of response-ability. The person is always able and is always in a position to respond. And I just would like to digress briefly and say that this also calls on a faculty of courage within the human being. Human being is called upon, this concept of responsibility requires the human being to be courageous. It requires the person actually to demonstrate a certain aspect of, we could even say, self-sacrifice. And maybe self-sacrifice is part and parcel of the idea of self-transcendence. I am willing to sacrifice my interests. I am prepared to sacrifice my perceptions. I'm prepared to sacrifice my emotions and to submit them to scrutiny. And not only when these come from within me, but when they come from the outside society and they seek to mold me, they seek to pressure me in a particular way too. There is a very important moment and requirement I suppose we could put it, of personal courage involved over here. So the person is called upon to respond. So Frankl, however, takes this concept of responsibility and conscience, I think, a step further. Once again, it's tempting to say that conscience or meaning is personal. And to some extent, it is personal. To some extent, it is a situation. But we cannot remain with that, because there will be a terrorist also has a meaning. A gangster has a meaning. A sadist has a meaning. A suicidal person has a meaning, may have a reason for wanting to end their life. But these ultimately are not acceptable meanings. These meanings, there is something deficient about these meanings. And therefore, we enter into a very important area, which I want to discuss at length and later on in these lectures, about the question of what meaning actually entails, where meaning takes us. Now, Frankl himself saw the concept of responsibility and meaning as relating also to ethical principles. We look for reasons why things happen. We look for guidance. We look for prompts. We ask, what is providential in our situation? But very often, the questions which we have for meaning are questions which relate to the idea of ethics, the ethical principles. We're looking for ethical principles of conduct. That is a very important area of meaning. And Frankl, in one place, he speaks about this in terms of, he relates to the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments which were given at Mount Sinai. And he says that one of the most important functions of meaning, of this quest for meaning, the search for meaning, is to apply, and I'm quoting Frankl here, the 10 Commandments to the 10,000 situations of life. In other words, he was saying that, and he was saying that there are universal and objective values, and one of the important tasks of the human being is to apply these universal values to the particular situations in which the human being finds him or herself. So I think this is of enormous importance. And as I say, I will be coming back to this, because meaning is not just any meaning. There is meaning and self. It is meaning which is actually led by genuine self-transcendence. And Frankl, as we see later, will talk about this, and he will say that it leads us to certain objective universal values. So we have self-transcendence, we have freedom and responsibility, and these are all of these concepts are actually linked. Now, question then is, well, what does this mean for all of us? What does it mean for psychologists? What does it mean for culture? What does it mean for culture as a whole? It means that, for example, in the realm of education, children have to be told that they are not driven by emotions. They are not driven by perceptions, but that they have to quest for values. They have to that they possess a power of self-transcendence. It's important for children. It's important that adults know this. For everybody has to know this, and they have to know also that they have this self-transcending ability, the self-transcending faculty, is their essential self and their highest self. Frankl writes that educationalists need to cultivate in students the knowledge of the ultimate ethical values to which the human conscience leads. And it's this knowledge which actually nourishes conscience or the spiritual faculty within the student. Students need not only need to know these values, but they have to know how to apply these values in their lives. Education is not simply about the transmission of knowledge, it's about the training of ethical character. And ethical character is something which is formed through self-transcendence and through conscience. Okay, so how logotherapy will be applied in different cultural situations, of course, will vary. There are places in the world today where there is terrible, terrible crisis, war, social breakdown. There are situations, as we find in the West today, where there is an extraordinary unraveling, disintegration of human identity. The situation in Western societies today, as seen by so-called doctrines of gender fluidity, actually deconstruct human identity. This is a crisis which is as great as a crisis of war. It is because what it does is it is a crisis which actually threatens to decompose human personality. Now, why did this happen? Why did this happen in the West? As I say, I know what's happening in the West. I know in America, in Europe, in Australia. It's because the concept of conscience has been removed from the human being in psychological and social thinking. Paradoxically, in Eastern Europe, where communism ruled for generations, and where communism stamped out the concept of the soul, it's in Eastern Europe that we find the revival of the spirit. And I suppose it's precisely because it was stamped out for so long that it's in a number of Eastern European countries that one finds finds much more religiosity than one does in the Western than one does in the Western society. But at all events, the notion that we must recover the concept of the human soul or conscience or spirit, which is essentially the power of self-transcendence, which is that which reaches out to something higher. This is something which is vital in the world today. I don't know, as I said before, what challenges you face in Georgia or in other places in Eastern Europe, but I can tell you that in the West, we suffer terribly because of the eclipse and the erasure of this concept of conscience and self-transcendence. Well, at this point, I'd like Nino to open to discussion, if that's possible, or maybe I don't know if that's how you'd like to do it.
Yes, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I invite you also to join the discussion, to ask questions. If you like, you can write your questions and we will translate, or just raise your hand and ask. Or we can give you some time and you can do it at the end of the lecture.
Well, I must be honest with you. I have said already what I wanted to say in this lecture, but I'll start by asking you a question. Tell
okay.
me I would like to know, what is, in terms of the things that I have said now, what is the situation in the societies in which you live? How is the human being viewed? Whether it's in contemporary social ideology or in therapeutic practice. Is there any consideration of the human being as a free, moral agency, in addition to the conditioning psychological factors? Are any of these concepts that we've discussed today, are they active in social, in society or in psychological practice in your countries?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think hopefully in Georgia, still yes. Our society is still moral, and we can consider a person as a three-dimension person, not only physical or psychological, but also noetic, also person who have a soul who is dedicated to meaning. Yes, in Georgia, yes, still.
That's good news. What else? Where and what other societies are represented here amongst the listeners, the participants?
I can see that we have participants from Azerbaijan, from Georgia, from Ukraine, from Australia.
Right. As for Azerbaijan, this is a Muslim society to some extent. Is that right?
Yes.
Would somebody like to tell me about how?
And today is Bayram in Azerbaijan, so congratulations to you all.
Very good. So I'd be interested to hear how social values play into psychological practice in that country.
Good evening. Can I say a word? Thank you very much for this lecture. And as a country who went through war 2.5 years ago, we also have some different positions we changed within two paradigms. But in the last 2.5 years, we can say that morals are more strong and people like to communicate and we feel our historical roots more strongly. And actually after war, people refer to psychology more often that was before the war. And we have I am representative of Azerbaijan Psychological School, kinda, and we are really happy that psychological community becomes stronger. And personality here, yes, we are a Muslim country, but religion is out of our kind of government, but 90% or maybe 95% of population are Muslims, and that's okay. And so thank you very much, Nina. Yes, Eid Mubarak for all our Muslim friends. So this is a little introduction from Azerbaijan. Thank you again.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I wish that that you could communicate with the American Psychiatric Association and share your experiences with them. This is this is something in the West. We have a lot of problems, but we have major crises at the moment in our society. But at all events, anybody else?
Hello, everyone. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm a little bit afraid about our souls because now we have
I can't
more.
hear. Sound.
No sound.
I know I can hear you. Didn't hear you a minute ago.
I said that I'm afraid about Ukrainian souls because now many of us are they hate Russians, and this they have cause why they hate them, but it's very bad for us because hate make nothing than something destructive. And I didn't understand quite about you that you said that now in Eastern Europe, people are more concerned about the soul, about conscious, and like Russia is one of the most biggest country in the East, and they started the war, so they do not concern about the soul and conscious at all.
Well, it's I mean, they would probably say they do, but it's I agree. I don't want to make any comment on the war. I'm very sad and troubled by what is happening there. But I suppose what I wanted to say was that this was actually a perception of Western Europeans. In other words, at least whatever conclusions they come to, they see that there is a life of the spirit as well. And this has seen a number. I mean, I don't know what's going on there. I've been countries like Hungary and Poland, and these are countries. I don't know if there's any from Hungary or Poland here, but these are countries in which there is a stronger religiosity than you find in the West, and Ukraine too, I would think. But at least it's a what can I say? You know, people can, the fact that religion itself sometimes needs to be purified. Sometimes people do bad things in the name of religion, but I don't think that that's genuine religion. Genuine religion is one in which people maintain their humility and unfortunately, it's conflict comes from something other than spiritual grounds. Spirituality can sometimes be used as an excuse for conflict, but genuine spirituality is not like that. And I think this is the message of Frankl. Frankl thought that every human being is capable of self-transcendence, and as I want to point out later, maybe in the coming lecture, he thought that through pure and genuine self-transcendence, there will be actually people come to the same conclusions. They don't come to conflict, they come to peace, not conflict, through self-transcendence. So that is an observation. It's an observation for now. But when we're looking there's another point also. So I'm glad you raised this point, because the human being, where do we find harmony and unity between human beings? It's when they discover what they have in common. When the human and what human beings have in common is the spiritual, is the ability to transcend themselves. And when one looks and when one can focus on the when one can focus on the higher spiritual self, people, then we can come together. People can come together. That I think is a very important thing. And you mentioned hate and so on and so forth. It's very understandable why they feel that way. But it's interesting that Frankl himself took the view, and Frankl himself was, of course, experienced the horrors of the concentration camps. But Frankl realized that it's not about nations, it's about individuals, it's about people. We want to say that we're looking, that any human being can be a self-transcending. A Ukrainian person can be self-transcending, and a Russian person can be self-transcending. Or alternatively, they could both not be self-transcending. But what we are looking for in ourselves and in others is this ability for self-transcendence. And when we do that, it'll come together. In other words, if Frankl went so far as to say that he did not believe in the collective guilt of the Germans, even though the Germans as a nation carried out atrocities, because he believed that there are not evil nations and good nations, but there are individuals who are decent and individuals who are not decent. In other words, every human being as individuals have the choice whether to practice self-transcendence or not, whether to be moral or not. And it's a task which is if we focus on that ability within ourselves, we could see that ability in another person. If I know that I am capable of rising above myself, then I can see that the other person also has that ability. And maybe we can, maybe on that basis, it's a different foundation for human relationships.
Thank you.
Would anybody like to make a comment?
Yes, dear Barham.
Yes, hello. It was a great pleasure to hear about Frankl. I have a question, or if you can say a comment, because personally I got influenced mostly by existential philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. I want to ask a question, as you said, about the freedom and the choice. I want to ask, as Sartre, by the Sartre's code, that if I consider myself free and have an option of the choices, I'm feeling terrible anxiety, or we can say angst. And I think it is it's in the authenticity way of the human beings to feel this anxiety, because on that moment, exactly on that moment, they understand that they are using their freedoms. And what also Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, says as a authenticity or Eigenlichkeit is that, and I think it is easier for human beings, for cultural values, to ban the freedom, and they're not going to feel anxiety, because it is difficult to feel it, that terrible anxiety and things like, I have so many choice, I can do so many things, but I'm in the, I can say like that, I'm the crossroads. In the crossroads, I have two ways, and I will choose one of them. And there's a consequences of each ways. I wanted to ask, is there possibility that we can say yes also to our anxiety? If we are saying to the life yes, if we are saying to the freedom yes, also are we going to say yes to the anxiety, to existential anxiety?
This is a very good question. And my answer to you is, as you know, Frankl called his logotherapy also, he used the word existential analysis or analysis of existence. But it is quite different from existentialism, as we find in Sartre, Heidegger, and others. It's very, very different. And we have to understand, and basically it is associated with two different concepts of freedom. The kind of freedom that Sartre or Heidegger, I don't know, I'm more acquainted with Sartre, with certain schools of existentialism, or Camus. They have a concept of freedom from, to be free from the constraints, free from being bound to any particular social mores or value. The concept which we find in logotherapy is freedom to. In other words, the freedom to actualize, the spiritual, to connect with this realm of conscience and to embrace conscience. In other words, it's a freedom which is a product of responsibility. I choose to bind myself. What does the word religion mean? Religion religion comes from a Latin word, which means religio. I tie myself back. I bind myself. I bind myself to a value. I bind myself against my impulses and my perceptions. So in this way, and we'll talk, I hope to talk about this more. You heard me, Frankl believed that conscience opens to a realm of transcending ultimate objective values, and that this should be embraced. Now, if this is the case, it's the very opposite of Sartre, of secular existentialism. Because secular existentialism, as you point out, leads to this angst, leads to this uncertainty, leads to this free-floating existence, this existence of just being cast, not knowing where you are, not knowing where you're going. That is not what Frankl is about. Frankl is exactly the opposite. Frankl, the concept of existential analysis in Frankl means I need to understand my circumstances, my personal, in the terms of choices which connect me to that which is beyond myself, which is higher, to a higher certainty. So I think that the existential analysis of logotherapy is exactly the opposite of secular existentialism. And Frankl actually says as much himself. Yes. Any other questions? It was a good question. Thank you for asking that question. All the questions and comments are good. I'm happy to hear from all of you.
Also, there are two questions in chat. And yes, Diana.
I just wanted to add something. It was a very good philosophical question about Dr. Shimon Cohen. He's a doctor of philosophy, literally philosophy, not like we have PhD in music and arts, but his PhD was in philosophy. That is why he can answer any philosophical existential question as an expert in this field. And if you have any questions you want to clarify in Russian, I took notes and I'm happy to provide summary if needed. But I observed a very interesting question about Martin Buber and his I-thou relationship. Thank you.
So, Nino, you have some questions there in the chat?
Yes, we have some questions. Yes. A minute. Tyson writes, some ideas I have been trying to connect recently. Frankl's ideas of conscious responsibility seems related to those of Buber's idol relationship. In a recent discussion with John Viereck, who coined the term of relevance realization, the idol was described as when we see how we might be relevant to another rather than how to other in relevant to us.
In other words, that you're saying the I-thou relationship is a notion of responsibility for others. Is that the point that's being made here? One feels responsible for another person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
correct.
yes. Well, I would like to say, just generally speaking, that I think that Frankl's doctrine is even more religiously anchored than Buber. I think that because I think Frankl himself makes reference to things which Buber does not. In other words, Frankl talks about the 10 Commandments. Frankl talks about the importance of the content also of religious tradition. Buber was more liberal in his thought, in his thinking. But yes, I mean, but there could be elements in Buber which do relate. In other words, yes, any other questions?
Yes, another comment from Eto. I think that society is one thing and trends in psychology another. In psychology today, the dominant idea concerns only freedom, responsibility, in most cases is ignored. Without responsibility, freedom takes on a completely different meaning, which in my opinion is the cause of the crisis.
In other words, the freedom without responsibility, freedom just simply means freedom from. Nobody will tell me what to do, and I will decide what I want to be. So that is that person who speaks like that, the person is not answering to anything, is answering only to himself, not to a higher conscience, a higher awareness, if I understand that correctly. And that's in other words, it's an egotistic individualism. That's certainly not responsibility in the sense of Frankl. It's not self-transcendence, because it's rather egotistical. And self-transcendence means going beyond ego.
Thank you. Yes, Ina?
Yeah, I can add something about it, that if we focus only on freedom, it leads to anarchy, or could lead to anarchy. There is no rule of law, because the personal values or moral values, ethical values are ignored. And perhaps most of you know about Viktor Frankl's dream and society. As you know, there is a statue of freedom on the east coast of the United States, and his dream was to build a statue of responsibility on the western coast of the United States, to have a balance. Always there should be a balanced approach to things.
In other words, freedom says I can be responsible, but responsibility says I must be responsible. So this is the this is the difference, and it's a very, very important thing and very ennobling quality. Human beings need to know they need to be courageous, and they have responsibility. We have responsibilities. In other words, an interesting thing, you know, unfortunately in Western Europe, we have now the phenomenon of euthanasia in Western societies. It's terrible. It's one critic says, what's bad about euthanasia? Two things. They said, on the one hand, they don't understand the value of life. They don't understand what life is. There's no sense of the spiritual concept of life. The other thing is that euthanasia and suicide, God forbid, is also, it is an abnegation, a removal of our responsibility to others. It destroys the structure of human relationships. The person says, the person who suicides has abandoned responsibility to the whole network of his or her relationships. That's also very important. So we're responsible to the source of our life. We're responsible to others. Responsibility extends in all different directions. Very important statement. So.
And another comment from Tyson. Eto's question is very much related to mine. In an either we are responsible to another rather than simply to our own whims.
100%.
Any other questions? Dear colleagues, do we need to summarize this lecture in Russian? Do you have any questions or any misunderstanding? I can see that no, perhaps no.
If somebody except for me wants to summarize in Russian, it will be great.
Yes, dear Tyson, please write your question. Irina, if you don't mind, we can shortly summarize.
Да, ну, началась лекция со слова meaning, смысл в жизни. И смысл очень важен, потому что мы сейчас живем в очень трудных временах, во времена кризиса. И самое главное, что сегодня, в сегодняшнем времени, это он мне сказал, я говорю от себя, что единственная константа в сегодняшней жизни – это изменения, темп изменений. И количество изменений просто очень ускорился, и поэтому очень наступил кризис. Есть кризис в странах, где идет война, к сожалению, как идет в Украине. И мы с доктором Шимоном Кауэном сделали такие же 5 лекций для Украины в сентябре 2021 года. Они прошли с успехом, и надеюсь, что они помогут нашим украинским коллегам помогать жертвам этой войны, которая находится сейчас в сильнейшей травме. И по Франклу, для того, чтобы найти этот смысл жизни его, он только через самотрансцендентацию или возвыситься над собой, и это можно достичь только через универсальные этики и универсальные ценности, потому что даже террорист или криминал, у них тоже есть свои какие-то смысл жизни, но их смысл жизни, конечно, неправильный. Единственный правильный – это через универсальные ценности. Поэтому смысл без ценностей не имеет смысла. Так, что я тут еще писала? Франкл говорит о 3 составных человека. Первое – это соматический или наше тело, физический, биологический. Второй – это ментальное измерение человека, психология наша, и оно имеет дело с нашими эмоциями и восприятиями. И третье измерение человека – это самое главное, которое объединяет все другие. Это называется ноэтик, как он называл, ноос от греческого слова значение, что должна быть цель в нашей жизни. И это ноэтическое или третье измерение – это человек, который верит в Бога, скажет, что это наша душа или spirituality, а тот, который не верит в Бога, он назовет это, что это сознание, наше сознание. Мы всегда говорим, у тебя есть совесть. Совесть или сознание, вот это то, что верующий или неверующий человек скажет, но это примерно одно и то же. Так. И также он приводит вопрос, известное выражение Виктора Франкла, что вопрос стоит не в том, что я хочу от жизни, а что жизнь хочет от меня, кем я должен быть в этой жизни, что я должен сделать. И вот это коррелируется со свободой к свободе, к чему-то, что я должен сделать в этом мире. Что еще говорилось? Да, и self-трансцендентность – это умение или возможность человека возвыситься над собой, и не только над собой, но теми обстоятельствами, в которых мы находимся. И он открывает нам, ведет нас, когда мы возвышаемся над собой, над своей ситуацией. Он говорил пример о том, что каждый может возвыситься, даже человек, который сидит в инвалидном кресле, он может возвыситься как бы внутренне, возвыситься над своими ограничениями. У нас даже в Австралии, во всем западном мире уже не говорят disability, человек с disability. Disability – значит человек с ограничением, а мы фокусируем свое внимание на ability. Что может человек сделать в данной ситуации? И самотрансцендентация ведет к двум вещам, о которых мы говорили. Это свобода и ответственность. Свобода – это ответ на обстоятельства в смысловом виде, со смыслом. И свобода не определяется физическими и ментальными ограничениями. Человек может возвыситься, даже несмотря на каких он находится ситуации. Я писала просто по-английски, я перевожу свои эти notes, так что извините, может быть, не так красиво. Всегда есть место, вот он говорил, вот это есть space, чтобы сделать осознанный выбор. Так. И что он еще говорил, что самотрансцендентность, она всегда, и имеется в виду наша душа, она всегда здорова, она никогда не болеет, она всегда чистая, и она всегда свободна от давления, на которое она оказывает на ментальных или физическом уровне. Душа всегда, или дух наш, или совесть всегда свободна и независима. Эта свобода возникает из нашей силы ответственности, из нашего умения быть ответственным за свои поступки. И вот он что рассказывал очень, что концепция свободы была сейчас очень подвержена неправильной интерпретацией на Западе. И это относится, например, он сводит, западная психология сводит человека только к эмоциональному и восприятельному уровне человеческой личности. И, например, очень сильный сейчас кризис существует в том, что говорят о fluidity, это gender fluidity, это что гендерный, что невозможно определить, какого пола человека. Это очень сильное нехорошее влияние с точки зрения доктора Кауэна на человека.
Спасибо большое. Я
Вот
думаю,
так.
вы охватили все концепты,
Да.
которые сегодня представил доктор Кауэн. Спасибо вам большое.
Спасибо.
Dr. Cowan, here is another question from Tyson. Responsibility to something greater than us is a path to self-transcendence. Of the three sources of meaning, there are tasks, people to love, and attitude to maintain. These are all something external to us.
So is that a statement or is it a question?
I think it's a statement.
Right. Well, sure. In other words, we're reaching beyond ourselves constantly, and that's how. And that is a sign of our humanity. That so it is with all of the emotions. Love. I can love myself and I can love others. In other words, okay, there is a certain amount of place for self-esteem and concern, but generally speaking, the human being has to look beyond, and that way the human being is actually most fulfilled, because that's what the human spirit wants. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your first interesting lectures, and looking forward to see you next week. Thank you for your seminar and responses, Rabbi Cohen. Thank you, Tyson. Thank you for your questions. Thank you all.
And thank you. I value your comments, and it's a great pleasure to meet you. Wish you well. All the best.
It's all our pleasure. Dear Ina, thank you very much for taking part.
Большое спасибо. Я хотела еще одно замечание. Шимон Кауэн сказал, что он очень в восторге от того, что в странах бывшего СССР есть такое, происходит возрождение религиозности, потому что вы этого на Западе не увидите. И как правильно сказала Фатима, есть вот эта связь поколений, традиций и ценностей. Это то, что отсутствует сейчас на Западе, и в этом очень большой экзистенциальный кризис. Так спасибо вам и всем нам, кто из бывшего СССР, что мы продолжаем эти традиции наших народов, и что мы можем все, там был вопрос про ненависть, это ужасное деструктивное чувство, но если мы возвысимся, мы должны все смотреть на то, что нас объединяет, а не на то, что нас разъединяет. Но он будет об этом говорить в следующих лекциях.
And next week, I would like to talk about Frankl's path to logotherapy, how he came from Freud, Adler, and in his own personal development, how he reached it, which tells us also a lot about his teaching. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All the very
exciting.
best.
Till
Bye
next
bye.
week. Goodbye all.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.